Good morning. It's Wednesday, the best day of the week. Dan, are you ready for Data Day?
I am. I love Data Day. I love Data Day. It's got to be one of my favorite days because I get to learn hard, concrete facts about the industry and learn how I can turn it into really cool sales conversations.
Yeah, so without further ado, let's get started, brother.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool to have Wednesdays. I feel like it's the middle of the week. We're able to use some data, be able to talk about things, and it's awesome. It's one of the best days of the week for us to kind of give ourselves some ammo in terms of like talking to our customers, understand when the market. And there's nobody better than the principal analysis at DAT Freight Analytics, Dean Croke. We're going to welcome into the show this morning. As always, good morning. Welcome to
Hey.
Sales Chatter Live. What's going on, Dean?
Yeah,
Data
good to meet you
Master
guys.
9000.
Yeah. Yep. Always learning something new every day. There's always some new data coming out. We're in a precarious time, as we spoke on our show yesterday, where you were a guest, Ryan. This is a pivotal time. We're desperate. Some people are. I'm desperate for seasonality to emerge in the market. So some sign that freight demand is picking up because we've reverted to almost 2019 levels in so many respects. And I have my carrier hat on most of the time, and carriers have had a really rough go of it in the last 9 months with record high diesel prices and spot rates dropping so much. We're at the bottom of this freight cycle, as we talked about in the show last week. The market is still looking for some sense of, normality, if we can use that term after this disruption we've had. But this is like, we've got, I'll quote Tim Denoyer from ACT Research or ACT Research. He writes the Cass Freight Shipments Report, which comes out around the 12th of each month. And one of the things he said, and I had this on our highlights of our show yesterday, he said that soft retail sales, ongoing destocking, and lower import volumes remain primarily headwinds to freight volumes for some time to come. And that was the some time to come bit that got me thinking about where we're at, because his cash shipments analysis, so remember, I think it's around, I'm going to say 40 billion in freight spend, made up of truckload and LTL. I'm not sure of the split. I think could even be some intermodal in there, but it's still a reliable index. The shipments, the volume of shipments moving down about 1% in March and about 4% compared to this time last year. So, one of the things that the experts on the demand side have been saying is that volumes should remain negative year over year, which again is not surprising because of what last year was like. But they said that things will sort of slide. They use the word slide, sort of sideways, which doesn't indicate there'll be a peak season, any sort of increase in demand that we would normally see over the spring and into the summer and then into the holiday season. So the other data point that popped up was Jason Miller's Michigan State University Truckload Ton Mile Index, which I think is probably the most reliable external data set in the market, because he pulls it from 41 freight producing commodities in the market. Volumes were flat in February, so it's a lagged index, so it comes out on a 45-day lag. Volumes in February were flat, down about 1% year over year. But the data point that he mentioned that was probably the most important was February truckload volumes were up 1% compared to 2019. So that's not good news, right? When you think about freight market cyclicality and seasonality, because there's so many aspects of our freight market that look like 2019 did. On our show yesterday, Ryan, we talked about California reefer rates, refrigerated rates, identical to 2019. There's so many parallels. Jason's, index has, it's been very accurate over the last 20 years when you go back and retrospectively apply all of his data points to normalize the index. And the fact that it's lining up with 2019 tells me that that's kind of our worst case scenario, right? Because 2019 was just a slow grind. It wasn't like there was a massive fall off in rates. It was just a slow grind all year, which really forced a lot of carriers into trouble. So that's where we're at. We're at this sort of inflection point in the market where we are looking for some sense of seasonality to emerge. There are some signs. There was some good news yesterday. The US Census Bureau released their single-family housing permits data and housing starts. I thought it was a good data point. The media didn't really pick up on it. I focus on single-family homes because single-family homes being built are the most freight-intensive for, firstly, flatbeds who haul, shingle, siding, lumber, dimension frame lumber. And then once the house is finished, you've got to fill it with furniture, carpet, appliances. So it's a lot of dry van volume. So I think this is a really important data point. If you're thinking about what does demand look like for your services this year, the housing market, I think, is one of the more reliable indicators, along with just general manufacturing data. Single family housing starts out yesterday showed that volumes are up about 3.5% in March compared to February. The important data point, though, is building permits, which are applied for by builders in advance of digging ground. So permits generally lead a housing start by, I'm going to say, 1 to 2 months, roughly. So if you're looking at forward demand indicators, permits to build single-family homes are up 4% month over month, which is good news. We normally see building activity improve in March and April as temperatures warm and people start digging holes because they're being understored. So yeah, we've got some mixed signals right now. Good news on the housing start front. Produce is still lagging behind, but it should pick up. There are some good signs that market should continue. But as Tim Denoyer said, we've got some headwinds, and I think we're still suffering from some of the lingering effects of the pandemic in terms of, bloated inventories, and imports have still to pick up. So fascinating times if you're thinking about buying and selling capacity or doing bids for shippers. This, some of the signals that are out there are really mixed at the moment, and we know that one of the pivotal data points is the bottom in the spot market rates. They're at about $1.68 a mile, excluding fuel. That's precariously low for carriers who have operating costs most likely higher than that. So these are, I think April and May are going to be really important times. And our show yesterday, we said that if we're still having this discussion by Memorial Day, it will be a very different year for all of us.
I have one big question, Dean. 1% year over year in down. What do you think that equates to in like truckload LTL shipments? How many shipments do you think that 1% represents?
It's a good question. Jason Miller pegged the total number of shipments in truckload industry at about 225 million. My math is not good enough to figure out what that means. But
so would that be 25 million?
Yeah, I guess. I'm not sure I could get my big calculator out.
Hold on. So if it's 225 million, 1% of that would be 25 million.
Yeah. Right? Spread across the entire industry. I don't know. I'd have to get my calculator out. So I could tell you, I don't know that, 1% is not a lot, right? I think put that into context. 1% is not a huge amount. I don't think that moves the needle all that much, but we've still got a lot more capacity in the market. So that's what's driving rates down, right? Is the excess capacity in the market. This hasn't been a demand story for the best part of the year that we've just sort of come out of. It's been mostly a overcapacity issue, and so that's really where we're still at. We're still at this excess capacity. I did translate the number of single family homes into truckloads. If you're interested in what that means. On the truckload front, we're running about 80,000 fewer truckloads in March compared to March last year. So 80,000, truckloads in a month is a lot of flatbed loads that aren't being moved. On the steel side, we've got the lowest steel production since 2017 going on right now. That equates to about 70,000 fewer flatbed loads being moved of steel. So when you just look at where we sit right now after the market has returned to normal, and now we're talking about normal being a lot like 2019, you can just see there's just much less volume moving in the entire market. The problem is we've just had this exuberant influx of capacity into the market starting in 2021 that's still hanging around in the market right now. Some companies are hanging on by, not by much because their margins are so tight and their costs are so high. They're really being squeezed by these low rates in the spot market. So we're at the tail end of all of that. So we'll know very soon how that market inflection point's going to happen. Ken was right yesterday on the show when he said that, if rates do move down another 5 to, I think he said maybe 5 to 7%, that will accelerate capacity leaving the industry, and that will accelerate the turn in the market, and capacity will tighten and rates will go up, which for people listening on the show, of course, that are in sales and buying capacity, this means that your bids are going to start to come in, will need to be factoring in higher. You're going to be buying capacity at a higher cost throughout the rest of the year. That's what that means. So when we talk about the bottom of the cycle and looking for signs of seasonality, there's probably a dozen things that have got to line up for all of this to happen. And, none of them all happen at the same time, unfortunately. Otherwise, we'd be more precise with this.
Yeah, it's 250,000. So
okay,
we were only a couple of zeros off.
But yeah, I was gonna say 25 million. That's not a small number at all.
My calculator hasn't got enough space for all the zeros. I did burger math at school. I was pretty good.
Use AI class that one, but
so that's interesting. So that's that. You said 250,000. So think about that. Yeah, and we've got probably 150,000 just in steel and flatbed alone. So you've got lower imports. So you could see how we could easily get to 1%. But I don't think that's, but remember, most of that's moving in the contract market, right? So, it's about an 85-15 split. We are definitely seeing more volume move in the spot market. And for those that didn't catch the show in the last 3 or 4 weeks, one of the things that is emerging at the moment is shippers are sending more volume direct to brokers. So we're seeing, normally it'd be 10% in the spot market. At the moment, it's probably closer to 15%. So there's been an increase in volume going, and that's where we've sort of been advocating for talk to shippers about low volume lanes where there might be opportunity to get some, go and get your carrier network hooked in. That's what shippers are looking for.
Now, are you also seeing, Dean? Are you also seeing a little bit of the 2018-19 mix when it came to bids? We saw a lot in 2018. A ton of bids were coming out because prices started skyrocketing and shippers wanted to cap their costs.
Yeah.
And then 2019 swung around and so much capacity was in the market, rates were dropping, that those contracted rates actually all went to the spot market because it was saving the company money as opposed to paying the high rates. And part of me says there's got to be a mix of that in as well, where shippers are saying, okay, well, you know what, we have 50 lanes that were awarded on this bid. We're going to take these 10 and just put them in the spot market to kind of save ourselves some money. And we're going to put 40 back into the contract market. Do you see that happening again?
Yeah, absolutely. It all happens every market cycle where I think the smaller shippers, I don't see the bigger shippers being transactional like that. I'd love Ryan's take on this, but my take is most of our bigger shippers have a pretty fixed formula for spot contract buyers, whereas I think a lot of the very small shippers who don't have a lot of volume tend to be more transactional. So they will probably use more brokers because they don't have a big enough volume to secure a large carrier, capacity pool. So they'll probably play the spot market more. There's certainly been a lot of encouragement for shippers to play in the spot market to reduce their procurement costs because that comes with a service. There's always a compromise when it comes to service and equipment type and delivery standards when you go with the cheaper options. So yes, it is happening.
There's also a if you look at say you have a Canadian carrier down in Texas, hypothetically, right?
Yeah.
And the Canadian carrier is now having trouble getting to Texas, right? Because their base is in Ontario or whatever, and then because of what's happening in the market, that freight is kind of drying up, or that customer loses the business, or whatever the issues are. Then you would see a lot of that business going back to spot market as opposed to being under contract because they just can't service it. And if as Ken was saying, if just a couple more percentages drop, we're going to see a lot of carriers get out. That's a lot of opportunity for other people to get into those lanes and secure them under contract.
Yeah. This is I've been at DAT for This is almost 3 years now, and it's been, and 3 years prior to that at Freightwaves. So I got to see both sides of the market. A lot of the tender volume work on the contract side, which was fascinating to watch how that played out, and then with DAT seeing how the spot market side of the market played out. And it's just been amazing to watch the cyclicality and how predictable things are, which is an alarming statement, because you would say, well, surely carriers and shippers and brokers would have learned their lessons from 2018 to 2019 and then 23. Well, no, there's just market forces that are at play here. This is the free market. It's all about supply and demand. With the downside comes the upside. And I think that's what we've been advocating for a long time here, is building partnerships with your shippers and carriers for the longer term, taking the longer term strategic, view to the market rather than the short-term cyclical. Unfortunately, there's a lot of, I guess, carriers, brokers, and shippers that have a very short-term, narrow view of the market and are very transactional.
Yeah.
And when I was at the Mid-America Truck Show, I heard something from a shipper, two carriers, and it got me thinking about low rates. So I'd love you guys to get your take on this. When we look at rates, we look at national average rates, and you hear carriers complaining about low rates. And of course, the rates are reflective of carriers that agree to haul the loads for intermediaries. That's the rate. DAT doesn't own trucks or haul freight. And we look at the rates coming down. They're down like 60 cents compared to this time last year, 60 cents a mile, excluding fuel. And one of the carriers said to me, I'm part of the problem. And I said, why is that? Because we were talking about low rates. And he said, well, I have this contract freight out of my hometown and it pays for my round trip. But hey, if I can get a load home, I'll take it for whatever I can. And for him, it's pure profit, right? That load home, because it's already been paid for by the outbound shipper. And it got me thinking, I wonder how much freight is being hauled on the back haul at low rates to complement a much higher paying head haul. And I suspect it's a lot more than what we think, because a lot of people think that there's all these spot market carriers doing, origin destination without regard for head haul, back haul. That's not really how it works for most of the carriers. There's a head haul component and a back haul component. Another carrier said to me, he's hauling, really highly expensive, volatile, dangerous, hazardous waste in dry vans. Because I said, what are all these placards? He's got like a dozen placards along the side of the van. And he said, well, I haul hazmat and I make a fortune. And we run from, Boston out to the Midwest, and that's where they process it. And I said, so what do you do on the way back? Because he said, we're getting paid like a lot of money per mile. It's round trip rates. We can come back empty. He said, no, we haul freight. And the term freight means, anything they can get from the broker network. So the trade-off is time in terms of going somewhere deadhead to pick up the load and then wait to load. But for these guys, they could run for $1 a mile. Like, it's all profit for them. So I'd love to get your take on that, because I'd not really thought about the market in that sense, that there's buyers and sellers, but on the carriers that are selling their capacity are not really doing cost plus. It's not like it costs me $1.90 to run, I need $2.30. They're thinking, heck, if I can get 50 cents a mile, that's 50 cents a mile I would never get to go back.
Yeah, so I see that in like two ways in my experience. I see that with produce, Dan, that wherever someone's gonna go, let's say I need to go to Texas, or I need to go to Yuma, Arizona. It's like I will take like a cheap load just to get there. I just need to get to, because the produce load is gonna be a lot. And when I used to do show freight, Dean, it was big like that as well, in terms of that, like, show freight always paid really good because of the time urgency, everything that's needed, the insurances, all that stuff. So we'd have guys maybe going from like 5 states over deadhead to us because they knew that they were going to get a good paying load with the show freight to kind of pay. So I think it's just like with anything, right? Like, Dan, like, you would say that, hey, if something's covered for, let's say your mortgage is covered every month, wouldn't you want to make a little bit of money to like have a little spend money, go on a nice little vacation or something like that, or bank up? So even though they say that they're part of the problem, I think one of the biggest things I see, Dean, is that even though these are a national average, and I don't really play in the spot a lot, but we don't see these numbers kind of like to us. Like the carriers don't pass the savings on to us. So it becomes a point of like, look,
Right.
carrier B called me and you've been my guy. Carrier A has been my guy for
Right.
X amount of
Right.
years, a couple months,
Right.
but I got to
Right.
kind of follow the money a little bit. You know, I got to,
Yeah.
it's my due diligence, because the way I see it as a broker, everyone thinks that brokers are like greedy and stuff like that. I'm managing my customers' transportation budget, my customers first and
Right.
foremost, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way that I kind of see it. So it's you got to be always open to conversation from there. So I think it's really important from there. I'd love to get your thoughts, Dan.
So I used to be VP of sales for a 150 truck fleet, and we focus on electronics. That's what I brought to the table, was electronics, and we were doing Dell, Apple, Microsoft were 3 big accounts, and they would pay almost 3 times, like a round trip plus half, 3 times the going rate. And our pretty much, I mean, we can run empty from Toronto all the way to Austin, Texas, come home and still make large. So we would take freight, cheap freight, and I see where they would say we're part of the problem. Now, like we were dealing with Aviva Magnetics in Scarborough, which is just CD cases. So you're shipping sailboat fuel. And it was all about price for them. We were at sometimes 90 cents a mile going down to Tennessee, $1 a mile going to Texas, and it didn't matter. We were in the same boat that other company was in, except it was on the outbound.
Right.
And outbound was gold. So I see that point of it.
Right.
I think it's more of a set yourself up properly to be able to do that. And if you can do it, good for you. But like Ryan said, it's the market that I think tears everybody down and pisses everybody off is, and this is probably the biggest one that I've heard, was back in 2019, the Toronto Montreal lane, $900, $1,100 kind of thing is typically average for that lane. Some of the bigger 3PLs were offering it up for $350. And the comment that a buddy of mine who owns a 110 truck fleet in Montreal said, Dan, it wasn't necessarily the $350. The comment was, well, if you don't take it, somebody will. And he says, that's what pissed me off, is that somebody's going to take it. Now, also understanding, Dean, you've been in a truck. You understand what it costs if you're stuck in a state for 2 days because you can't find freight. As a driver who wants to get home, like you're managing so many different personalities, so many different things happening. Sometimes they just have to take a loss to get their driver home, to keep the driver.
Well, it's the opportunity cost too. Like you've got fixed costs of $400 a day if the truck sits. There's the take the focus off the rate per mile. Think about the revenue per truck day. Right, so that's the key target you've got to be focusing on. So every day you're not running 600 miles, you're not making $1,500 truck revenue. So the opportunity cost of not taking that load could be far higher than just the rate per mile differential, because that's the thing that when you hear on the social media and all the different platforms, all of the aggressive conversations that are going on about that exact point, Dan, there's always someone else that'll take it for cheaper. That's one of the more common things you think about, and people visually describe talking to other drivers in the truck stop, and they're all, whinging about, there's this and that wrong with everything. And the next thing, one of those drivers jumps in his truck and takes off for a load. And everyone is saying, what the heck? He was just in here BSing us, and now he's heading out. Well, everybody's got, it's like survival of the fittest. Everybody's got their own operating costs. They've got their own revenue targets. They've got their own connections, their own markets. You can't blame people for behaving this way. And to me, it was just really illuminating, because we think, we think national averages, but really no one's home at the average. There's all of these different players in the market that are buying and selling capacity because of their own individual situation, because the market doesn't move as a whole. You've got your own individual contracts and customers with their own needs. And that's the great part about load boards and freight matching, is you match capacity with shippers. Like you've got loads to move in a market and you haven't got dedicated capacity, you can go to the broker market to find that capacity either through their own carrier network, like Ryan's got, or you've got, Dan, or you can go to a broader network like the DAT Load Board to find a broader group of capacity to match that demand.
And I look at it just like posting a Kijiji ad or a Facebook marketplace trying to sell something, right? You put it up for $300, you know somebody's going to offer you two. You know, if you settle, okay, my kind of where I want to settle on is 250, so you put it up for $300, you know, we'll meet in the middle kind of negotiation, which anyways, so you meet in the middle. If you're posting your freight on load boards and you get a call and you book it with a carrier, there is always going to be another carrier that calls and says, well, I'll do it for cheaper.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And that's a part of, I guess, for lack of a better term, as much as I hate, it's part of the game. Right. But I'll tell you, when I found some of my core carriers, I found them from posting on LoadLink.
Right.
And then they do the load, they do a great job. You start talking, and all of a sudden they become part of your core carrier. So it's, you know, it's like anything, right? Like you never know when the next really good partner is one phone call away. So these markets, I think, allow us as a broker. Now is the time where you start building Teflon relationships with your suppliers, because here's the thing. It's in 2021, 2022, you know, even, well, probably the last part of 2022, no, but I had so many people say, well, like, it's so tough to build relationships. And I'm like, because you're on that end now where it's almost like the brokers need us now. When the tide turns, if you're still there for those suppliers, then they'll realize you're true. Because how many brokers have called them up? And listen, everyone's been screwed over in this industry, right? Like, and when I say screwed over, meaning, you know, you think you got a relationship built, and as soon as produce hits, they, like Ryan was saying, they go and take the produce loads and leave you hanging in California. It's happened to me, but I'm sure it's also been the other way. When I first started in the industry, where I was like, well, I'll use you now when it's convenient for me, but as soon as it isn't, then we're going to flip the switch like you guys did to me last year. It's like this chip on your shoulder.
It's like that black book, right? It's just like, you know, you can't, I mentioned that yesterday on Dean's show yesterday, you know, you can't really think about, oh, I'm going to get him, you know, you got to think about it as an actual relationship. And the one thing you just said, Dan, which was so important, was that, you know, people are talking about, hey, I can never build relationships. Well, it's like the same conversation when people said, I can never find a truck. There's always a truck available. That's the one thing I've learned in logistics. There's always a truck available. It's just that there's not a truck at your price point, right? So that's always the issue that kind of comes to hand.
Yeah, there's always a truck at the right price.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey,
I'll come out of retirement for the right price.
You can find anything you want.
Yeah, you can find anything.
Right?
Dean, I got a question
well, you know
for
what?
you.
It's right. It's the right price and being able to work as a team. Right, because I've had trucks at the right price, but the shipper's not willing to work with me on the pickup time, so that truck doesn't work. Right. I think when all three align, you know, yourselves, the supplier, or the carrier, and the customer, when all three of you are in a sync and you're in a triangle and you're feeding off each other, so no matter which way it rolls, you still have strength. I think that's when it works. Right?
Yeah, that is. And it doesn't work on spot. I've never found that to work on spot because it's just a one-off, right? Dean, I want to ask you a question. I know this week everyone's getting prepared for it, the big TIA conference in Florida. I know it's a broker conference, it's more focused on broker conference. I know I've never been, I don't think Dan has been, but anybody who's looking to go, based on your experience, what are some key things, because some things discussions that are being had? What is the main reason for somebody wanting to go to a conference other than networking with people that they see on LinkedIn and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the networking is the big part of it, building relationships with other like brokers. So we see a lot of carriers looking to complement their network with other folks from other parts of the country. One of the things that I often see is someone that might specialize in heavy haul needs someone that specializes in hazmat. And it's a good way to find, you know, like thinking people that can complement your business, sort of to expand your network. Of course, the bigger part of it, though, I think, is the educational piece. I think you can never stop learning. The TIA has some wonderful sessions lined up, some incredibly good speakers. I'm not speaking this year, so I get to sit in on a lot of those sessions and just listen to what people are talking about. So a lot of it, there's always a mix of, sort of, what's the word, aspirational thinking, about technology. You always see a lot of that where you've got a lot of vendors talking about what's possible. We've seen a lot of, digital tech in the last few years. So you get a lot of new companies coming out showcasing their wares. The other part, though, is the exhibitors. You get to meet with a lot of exhibitors. So there's a lot of booth traffic. There's a lot of booths where you can just call by and get a product demo. Maybe there's some software that you need in your business. It's a good way to kick the tires of all of those folks. So they're the sorts of things. I love the exhibition part the best because that's where I get to see all the emerging technology that for DAT could be a threat or it could be a complement. So it's a good way to keep an eye on your competition also at these events.
I like that.
I like that a lot. So when is it? Where are you guys going to be? What's your booth number? If somebody wants to come in.
You're going to ask the booth number?
Yeah. Hey, man, we got that.
You won't miss the big DAT sign up top.
Yeah, so that's it. Look for the DAT sign. It's blue and white. That's about as close as I can get to a number. But it's at the in Orlando at the, God, I can't remember the exact location. Is it the Lowe's? I got to be technically correct here with this. Starts Wednesday evening. It's at the, if I can quickly pull this up, it's at the Lowe's Royal Pacific Resort at Universal. There we go. I had to get it right. I knew I was going to mess that up if I tried to do that on my own.
You know there's going to be a Universal in there.
Universal Orlando.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to be at Universal Studios. Dean's at Harry Potter Land, and he's like, forget this TIA business.
You can see I prep for travel a long way in advance. Heck, I know I'm flying tomorrow, but I'll have to figure that out in the morning when I get up.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
Yes, Universal Orlando. We've got a big event on
tomorrow, but I'll have to figure it out the morning when I get up. Don't worry.
Well, someone asked me the other day on one of our we ever do a 2-weekly review of things, so what's one of the things that you're happiest about every day? And I said, waking up.
I like that.
Just, come on.
That's just gratitude.
When you've been at this for, a lot of years, I'm just happy to get out of bed and draw breath. Let alone, go.
Do you ever think of some of the things you used to do, Dean, and just go, wow, I'm lucky to be here.
What was that? Like, you think, God, you used to go 7 days without sleep and drive all the way back across Australia twice and hauling farm machinery and think, what? Used to do that and then brag about it at the pub.
Yeah.
Beers on me. Beers on Dean.
Yeah, beers on me. I did 9,000 kilometers in 7 days.
Yeah.
It feels
one beer
saying,
your head hits the table. Yeah.
Then someone says, that's nothing. Let me tell you about what I used to do.
Back in my day.
Back in my day.
Yeah, that's it. People always
I walked to school uphill both ways in 3 feet of snow, and one of those.
Yeah. You were homeschooled, buddy. Brad, you were homeschooled.
Brad.
The one thing we will be doing at TAA is meeting up with some really good people like Cody Kohler from ANZ Trucking. He's a produce specialist off the West Coast. You guys will be interested in this. Him and I, and that's of course terrible grammar. But Chris Jolly, the freight coach, has a podcast that he runs every week. Love his show. Him and Cody and myself are looking to get together to do a monthly podcast on produce, just on produce. Nice. So just doing something with Cody would be fantastic because he's really got his finger on the pulse when it comes to produce over there. So that could be good for us to get a handle on seasonality as it relates to the produce market, because the West Coast produce market is absolutely pivotal. I think this is it, as goes California, so does the rest of the country when it comes to produce in particular, because it's the dominant market over there. So
I was looking forward to that.
Yeah, California was always that market where it could make or break you with your customers if you didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
It's a beast, man. What is it? California's bigger than Canada, I think it is, Dan. The population is it's crazy out there. So it's even with produce, for me, I pay attention to what we have in store, right? So we don't necessarily have the watermelons yet, so that hasn't started in Florida yet. We haven't had the cherries yet, but we're gonna know it's gonna start to pick up, right? And you kind of go with strawberries. Strawberries, Dan, are an all-time high, $8 for a carton at the grocery store this weekend. I was like, well, It's kind of cool to think about that too, because like produce, do you guys ever feel like, I know Dean, you mentioned this, you don't really like look at the prices, and I'm not really cost conscious, but like when I see something that's like $10 when it should be $2, I'm like, nah, it's a principle from it. But do you guys ever like switch over like to like, hey, let me just grab some frozen fruit instead, and kind of
No,
deal with that,
never.
or no? So it's always fresh.
Yeah, I'm always going for fresh because it's generally an event-driven purchase. You know, I'm not just buying raspberries for the sake of it, although I probably should. But I'm buying because there's an event. We're cooking a pavlova, or we're cooking some sort of exotic dessert where we need a bunch of fruit. So
Oh, okay.
price is sort of secondary.
Okay, I like that. I like. What
See,
about you, Dan?
I'm a flipper.
Right.
So I do the whole flip app.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say you buy the groceries and you sell them out of your trunk. You're like,
Yeah,
who needs some
well,
ribeye?
that's probably a pretty good business right now. But no, I do the flip app where I go and like, so I'll go and I'll see a pint just of raspberries, and I love blackberries and raspberries, and I'll find it for $5. And so I'll just, okay, then I'll pick it up. But if it's like $8, I won't touch it, because so here's the thing. I find produce right now has very little taste. And for probably the last year and a half, I found a lot of the stuff, until it's like Ontario grown, then I find the flavor comes back. But any of the imports, I find them to be so tasteless. Like
Watermelon too, man. Watermelon's horrible.
Yeah, like it's just, and I don't know if it's because it's picked so green and it ripens in containers or ripens in trucks and this and that. But it's just it's ever since COVID, I found that the produce is doesn't taste the same. Like tomatoes, they don't taste anything. Like one of my favorite things on the planet is a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. And like we're talking, half-inch thick pieces of tomato but it doesn't even taste like a tomato anymore. And even like all of it. So the strawberries, the raspberries, the blackberries, it's like they just don't taste the same. And then if I'm going to go for, call it second-rate flavor, I'm not paying $8 for it. Not a chance. That's the way I look at it.
First and foremost, we got to shout out Dan for actually explaining what a BLT is. I've never heard somebody say it the long form instead of saying a BLT. So shout out to that. But yeah, I love that you say that, because like we notice that a lot with watermelons. We just find that like it's like I don't know how to pick it properly, so it's probably me too. But yeah, the produce is hard. It's expensive first of all, and there's not really a difference between organic that I personally see. I know you can say it's organic and things like that, but it's interesting to see that Dan actually has that thought too. That like it doesn't taste the same, or maybe it's like maybe our taste buds have adjusted too, maybe because of COVID, if you've had COVID. But anyways, Dean, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. Can you tell again, TIA, give us some information on Dad IQ Live and any kind of cool things you got coming up as well?
Yep, I still know nothing more about TIA than what we just covered. I haven't done any research. I don't know the booth number, but we are the big blue and white sign at TIA. You won't miss us. Our show's on every Tuesday. I'd love you guys to join. Next week, we've got Jeff Nickinson on our show as our special guest. He's on 10 a.m. Eastern next Tuesday. You can catch us on YouTube and LinkedIn, subscribe and set up the alert, and that way you can watch the show. We're not sure what we're talking to Jeff about, but I do think
we're going to calls.
Yeah,
we're going to ask him
about
talk
RFPs or something.
Yeah, well, he hammered me today on where the bottom of the freight market is. So I think he's adamant that it's got a ways to go. I don't know. I hope it hasn't. But anyway, it's what we'll talk about next week. So, and then a bunch of travel. This is the busy season for travel with conferences. So, but we'll be here next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern on our show. And then, of course, back live with you guys again on Wednesday.
Yes,
Can't
sir.
wait. It's definitely the most important day. So we definitely will be hitting the replay back at 2 and 6 p.m. YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you found value in this, please like, comment, share, subscribe with your friends, your neighbor, your family members, the Amazon driver bringing your packages today. Definitely bring some value. So Dan, I'll leave it with you, brother. What was the big takeaway that you took away from Data Day Wednesdays today?
For me, it's always looking at the representation of year-over-year numbers and what that equates to in volumes. That has always blown my mind, how small numbers, you think 1%, 2%, 3%, you're like, oh, it's only 1%, 2%, 3% can equate to almost a million loads crossing our roads. Those numbers are huge, man. For me, that's the biggest thing on Data Day is when Dean brings numbers to the table, how do we equate it to what we do every day?
Right. Yep.
There we go. All right. Well said. So take care, everybody. We'll see you guys tomorrow for Thursday. Take care, everyone. Be safe.